Hi guys, my name is Megan and today I've got one of my favorite videos for you, and that is my favorite and least favorite books of the year. Alright, so like I said, this is one of my favorite videos to film every year because I get to tell you all about my favorite books and my least favorite books, and this year we're sticking in some of my favorite runner-ups this year. Just so you guys know, before we dive into the video, there will be no video on Friday because that is Christmas Eve, and then we will be back to regular posting. So let's just go ahead and just dive right in. Alright, so we're gonna start with my least favorite books of the year because I'd rather get that part out of the way because there are not that many of them this year, which is fantastic. My first least favorite books, and these are in no particular order, is Kingdom of the Wicked. I have a rant review for this one. I will leave that linked up in the corner. Let's just say I hated this book. At this point, I really just did not like it, and it's almost verging on hate at this point. There's also One Up, which this one I would recommend that nobody read. It's terrible. Don't read it. Also, Halfway to the Grave is on this list, and I'm really disappointed in this book. I wanted it to be so much better than it was, but you know, things happen. So this is one of my least favorite books of the year. And lastly, The Mismatch is on here. So this one was marketed as a romance when it is definitely more literary fiction with a side of romance than a full-on romance book. And I feel like that is the marketing people's problem. So with the least favorite books out of the way, let's move on to some honorable mention books before we get into my favorite books of the year. Okay, so my first honorable mention book has to go to Awkward. This was just such a fun romance book about a florist and a hockey player. They get together at a mutual friend's wedding and, you know, things happen and accidental baby. It's a super cute romance. Also, The Lightning Struck Heart. This was such a fun fantasy book. I had hopes that this one would break my fantasy reading slump, but alas, it did not. Or it partially broke it, but not enough to dive into some of my other fantasy books. This book is so fun, and definitely not for those under 18 because it is very dirty. Gary should get an X rating all by himself. But this book was really fun, and TJ Klune's writing is some of my favorites. So next up we have What Big Teeth in the honorable mention section. This was really fun. It's loosely inspired by the Addams Family. It's kind of like a gothic horror. It's got some vibes from like Coraline and The Haunting of Bly Manor, and it's just a gothic inspired slow horror. We also have Vengeful on the honorable mention section. This was such a fun read. Victor is one of my favorite characters. I wouldn't necessarily classify Victor as a supervillain, but he's definitely villainous and like not a hero. He's more like an anti-hero, but not quite a villain, if you know what I mean. This was such a fun read, and it's probably one of the bigger books that I read this year. All right, so next up we have The Witch King. This was such a fun book to read, and I really liked the way that this author meshed the fantasy and like technology and made their own kind of urban fantasy world that was just really interesting and full of really cool politics and, you know, trying to go sustainable and, you know, trying to make sure that the Fae aren't overusing their magic to tax the land. It's so good. All right, and then the last book in my honorable mention sections is Laura Jean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. This was such an interesting and like fun book. I really liked the use of color in this, and I really liked how this focused on like an abusive relationship and how this girl got out of that and paying more attention to what was going on around her after she got away from her toxic ex-girlfriend, figuring out that she's been kind of a bad friend while she was in this relationship, and it just was so good, and I would highly recommend reading it because it's just fantastic. All right, and then we are on to my favorite books of the year. It was so hard narrowing it down to 10 out of, at this point, I think I'm almost at 80 books that I've read this year as of filming this video in November. And these are in no particular order. The first one here on top of the stack, Running with Lions. This is one of my favorite YA contemporary sports romance books that I read. I love these characters. Almost all the characters are LGBTQ, and they are on a soccer team, and it's this soccer team at their summer training camp, and there's an ex-best friends that are trying to mend their relationship so they don't, you know, screw up the whole team, and maybe falling in love, and it's just lovely. Okay, so next up we have The Scapegracers. This is one of my favorite books from the year. Like, I love this book so much. This is about Sideways, and she is a teenage witch, and she gets hired by the popular girls to do some spells at their annual like pre-Halloween party, and something goes wrong, and these girls kind of adopt Sideways and, you know, try to get her a girlfriend, and like they form this little coven and like a girl gang. And I love these characters to pieces. They're all slightly unhinged in different ways, and they are lovely. Okay, so next up I have Get a Life, Chloe Brown. This is one of my favorite romance books from the year. It was lovely. Chloe is a chronically ill computer geek, and she's moving out into an apartment for the first time, and she kind of makes a bad first impression on Red, who is the building maintenance person, but they also kind of have mutual crushes on each other, and Chloe has this Get a Life list, and Red kind of becomes her teacher, and, you know, feelings happen, and it's a lovely read. Next up, we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This follows Linus Baker, who is a social worker for the department in charge of magical youth, and he gets kind of blackmailed into doing, like, he has to go to this teeny tiny little island and make sure these children are being taken care of in the way that they need to be. And, you know, he maybe falls in love with Arthur, who runs the orphanage, and it's just lovely. Next up, we have Fang. So this was a lovely little read and kind of unexpected for me to fall in love. This is one of the best manga that I've read in a very long time. It's so good, and it's about vampires, and so this follows En, who is just waking up after being attacked by a vampire and, you know, being turned into a vampire. And it also follows Ichi, who is kind of assigned as his guardian, and Ichi works for this vampire organization that, you know, helps protect vampires and, you know, make sure they're getting the proper nutrition in their like blood packs so they don't attack humans like what happened to En, and, you know, they kind of fall in love, and it's just so good, and I can't wait for the second volume. All right, so next up we also have Our Dining Table. This is a lovely, sweet story. This follows Yutaka, who is a businessman who struggles with eating in front of other people. So, you know, one day he goes to the park, and this like little kid comes wandering up to him wanting to know what he's eating and if he can try some, and that leads to Yutaka and Minoru, who is this kid's older brother who's taking care of him for the day, kind of asking Yutaka for help with their cooking because, you know, they don't make such great food. And it's kind of about, you know, sharing food and sharing your table and falling in love and, you know, over kindnesses that strangers offer to each other, and it's lovely and it's beautiful, and oh, one of the sweetest books I've ever read. All right, so next up we have Boyfriend Material. This is one of my favorite, you know, fake dating romances. Luke is a sweetheart. Both of his parents are musicians, and his father was never around when he was a kid. His father's trying to reconnect, and, you know, he's getting famous again for being on like a show kind of like The Voice or something. And that means Luke is back in like the tabloids, and that means Luke needs to clean up his image. So he starts fake dating Oliver, who is a lawyer, and then, you know, feelings happen, and these two are so sweet and so stupid, and I love them. Okay, so next up is The Hanged Man. This is the second book in the Tarot Sequence books, and this is a really fun urban fantasy series following Rune and Brand, who are the last descendants of the Sun Throne. It's following them as they kind of run this PI business, but also they're trying to regenerate their court, and, you know, Rune's coming into his powers finally, and there's kind of like an accidental child acquisition through this, and like we get to see so many new characters in this, and they start forming this like little found family, and it's so lovely. And honestly, I'm ready for book 3, but it's not coming out for 6 months. I would highly recommend checking out the Tarot Sequence books. They're so good. Okay, so next up we have White Trash Warlock. This is a recent read, as well as honestly one of my favorite urban fantasy books that I've read this year. This follows Adam Binder, and Adam has the sight, so he can see into the spirit realm or the magic realm. And Adam ended up in a mental institution for a few years, and that left some lingering bitterness between his family, and from there Adam kind of learned, you know, how to control his powers, but also he has a lot of trauma from being left in that situation. And, you know, this is set a couple of years after that, but please be forewarned, if you go into this book, there are a lot of trigger warnings. Adam gets a call from his brother one day that his wife has been possessed by a demon, and Adam goes to help, and then it turns into a nightmare from there, and it's just such a good book. Please be forewarned, there are a lot of trigger warnings with this book series though. Okay, and then the final book that I have on here is actually the entire series that this book is in, and that is All Systems Red and the rest of the Murderbot Diaries. This is one of my favorite book series that I've read this year. Like, I dove headfirst into this book, bought all 6 books without having, like, I barely finished this one and I bought the rest of the books, and like full on this has consumed my life. I've read one of these books every month, and I love Murderbot. Murderbot is one of my favorite characters, and honestly this is a great depiction of anxiety and depression, and it's so human for being a non-human character. This book series, you will fall in love with it if you read it, and they're so short. Every book is so short except for book 5, which is a chunk. But this book is just amazing all around, and would highly, highly recommend it. So this is probably the top favorite book of the year. So don't tell the other books though. All right, so those are my favorite and my least favorite books. I know this video got really long, but what was your guys' favorite book this year, and what was your least favorite book? Let me know down below. If you guys like this video, don't forget the like button. If you haven't already but would like to, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to follow me on social media for more bookish stuff, check out the links down below. Alrighty, bye guys!